Welcome to Think Tank, the podcast. I'm Steve Adubato. Boy, do I love to do this podcast. And joining me in the studio at East Main Media Studio is Nicole Swenerton, a senior producer at the Caucus Educational Corporation, where we produce all of our great programming, and our trusted colleague, Mary Gamba. Mary, do us a favor before we listen to Think Tank, the podcast with Matt Taibbi, contributing editor over at Rolling Stone, talking about an incredible case of Eric Garner over in New York, Staten Island. Tell folks about how they can find Think Tank, the podcast.
Absolutely. If you like what you're hearing, you can hear more of our Think Tank podcast by subscribing on Apple iTunes or Google Play. You could also visit our website at steveadubato.org. That's ADUBATO. And you could also follow us on Twitter, and that's at Steve Adubato, as well as on Facebook at Steve Adubato, PhD, to really just check out all the great things that we're up to.
Good. So let's set this up. This is Think Tank, the podcast. If you don't know Matt Taibbi, contributing editor over at Rolling Stone, he sat down with us in our New York studio at the WNET Tisch studio. We sat down with Matt Taibbi, and we talked about his book. It's called I Can't Breathe, A Killing on Bay Street. Now, this is the case of Eric Garner. You may not know the name. You may have heard of him, but you know the video. You've seen it. It's Eric Garner, who died while being choked by a New York City police officer who said originally that Eric Garner was breaking the law. He was selling loose cigarettes on the street, I believe, in Staten Island.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it was.
And Eric Garner was a very large man who I believe was suffering from asthma, choked out, and he kept repeating, I can't breathe, died that day. Mm-hmm. This is a huge case. This is a case that still goes on today. One of the police officers that was a part of the arrest, Nicole, help us on this, said that the charges against Eric Garner were exaggerated in order to make the case for why they even took him down.
Exactly, and his trial has still been delayed.
So, okay, the police officer that choked him out. So here's the thing, Mary, you see this, and again, Mike, my reason I say Mike Taibbi, because that's his dad. Mike Taibbi was a great reporter for WCBS in New York for many years. With Matt Taibbi, he comes down and very clear on this. He said it was wrong, it was dead wrong. The New York City Police Department, in many ways, either tried to cover it up or minimize the situation, that this is a classic case of an African-American man who was being treated unfairly, choked out by a New York City cop in a way that a white guy never would have faced, you think and you say.
Right. It's an ongoing challenge. The police brutality, how police choose to use force or not use force in a particular situation. It's in that moment. And again, you can see both sides of any story. And this one, of course, is especially tragic.
Are there both sides in every case?
I think there are. I think until you've walked in a police officer's shoes and until you've confronted someone and it is proven that he did resist being handcuffed, okay, there was resisting arrest. And there is an argument to that. If a police officer came up to me and said freeze or just said, you know, you're being arrested, you don't resist. There needs to be...
What happens if you say, I'm sorry for interrupting, but you're saying I can't breathe?
Right.
Cop says, yeah, well, you can't breathe, but you might be lying, and I'm going to keep choking you and holding you down.
Right, exactly.
What? That's police work?
No, that is not police work. And that's where it's very clear that obviously at that point, the police officer, but again, in a split second, and I think they said that was about an entire 15 seconds.
But why can't we just look at what it is and say, even if I'm not a cop, that's like saying I can't comment on anything that you and Nicole face as a woman because I'm not a woman.
Sure.
I don't think that's realistic.
Oh, no, and I think that it is our job as a community and as citizens to protect everyone.
Including police. But in this case, is it clear cut to you that Eric Garner was choked out? Forget about legally, illegally. I'm not a judge. I'm not a jury. I'm not a lawyer. It was wrong.
It was absolutely wrong.
Nicole,
correct.
Your thoughts?
I agree with Mary on that.
So you're making a face while Mary was talking.
No, I just think that it's pretty... You say, of course, that you would accept the handcuffs if a cop came over to you, but he was allegedly selling the loose cigarettes. So if he wasn't doing anything wrong, why would you let someone arrest you? You know, there's so much that goes into this.
Mary said, cop says, hold it right there. She's going to just go along. You?
I mean, I'm not doing anything wrong. You're not doing anything wrong. And of course, every situation is completely different. You really don't know how you're going to react in the situation. But I think what is one of the most really interesting parts of this whole story is the fact that the entire world saw this video. And that doesn't happen all the time. So for
what about
everyone,
if it weren't on video?
Who knows? Who knows if we even would know the story at all? I mean, the fact that this was on video, it went viral, and everyone across the country, across the world saw this, and everybody got to weigh in on their own opinions on this, that really turned the tides in this case, I think.
Let's just say this. Nicole and Mary see it in their own unique way, and it doesn't mean either you're for cops or against cops, believe it was right or wrong. It's not that, dare I say, black and white. But in this case, you've got Matt Taibbi on Think Tank, the podcast, who wrote this book, I Can't Breathe, the Eric Garner case. Listen to the podcast. And as we always say on Think Tank, the broadcast, watch what we say, watch what we do, but most importantly, think for yourself. After you listen to Matt Taibbi, make sure you think for yourself on Think Tank, the podcast. We are honored, the public broadcasting family, to welcome one of the most compelling journalists out there today, Matt Taibbi, a contributing editor of Rolling Stone, the author of this book, I Can't Breathe, A Killing on Bay Street. It's the story of Eric Garner, and a video that we can never forget and should never forget. Who was Eric Garner? Why does he matter so much more today than ever?
Eric Garner was an interesting, funny, complicated, flawed, much loved person. I started to be interested in his story most intensely after the decision by the grand jury to not indict the police officer.
Let's set it up again. Physically, where are we talking about? This happened on
Staten Island. Yeah, Eric Garner was the man who was.
He was selling cigarettes.
He was allegedly selling loose cigarettes, and he got into a confrontation with police, and they applied a chokehold, and he was killed in the incident.
What did he keep saying over and over again?
He said, "I can't breathe," 11 times, and nonetheless they kept subduing him. He died in the encounter. The video, the entire episode was recorded, and it was really...
by bystanders on the street, if I'm not mistaken.
Right, by bystanders. In particular, one man named Ramsey Orta, who's now in prison. And the fact that the whole thing was recorded became a kind of a seminal event in the history of the internet and the history of America's relationship to how it understands police brutality. And it was the first in a series of incidents, including people like Freddie Gray and Michael Brown, that sort of drew public attention to this case, to this problem.
Why did you jump into this? By the way, we've done so many programs connected to the complex set of issues dealing with police and the minority community, and we talk to a whole range of law enforcement professionals. We talk to folks who see things somewhat differently as some in the law enforcement community.
Sure.
What drew you to this?
Just out of curiosity, on the day after the grand jury decided not to indict the police officer in question, I drove out to Staten Island. I don't live that far from there, and I just started to talk to people on the street about...
That was a grand jury from the community.
Yeah, from the community.
Which
absolutely.
matters.
Which matters, yeah. And I started to talk to people on the street about Eric Garner, and he just seemed like an interesting person. And one of the things that, as a journalist, that disappoints me about some of these cases is that you never get to learn about who the people are. In a way, like their humanity is kind of robbed of them a second time because they're instantly capsulized and caricaturized in news stories. He's a Lucy dealer. He's a small-time thief. He's an X, Y, or a Z.
Yes.
We never get to know the whole person.
Put him in a box.
Exactly. And so I decided to kind of work backwards, find out who he was first and then work up to the incident and why it happened.
Describe his family.
He had 5 children, and he was very devoted to his kids. That was like the chief fact of his life. He was in very ill health. He had a lot of problems. Asthma and diabetes.
He's a big guy.
He was a big guy, 6'3", 350 pounds. He had done time for crack dealing, so he had a very hard time getting a square job. And this selling loose cigarettes was really the only way he could make money. And he was out there grinding 7 days a week. But almost every dollar that he made went to his kids. And in fact, he was known for not buying new clothes for himself because he spent it all on his kids. And there were a lot of interesting quirks like that about his personality.
When I think back on the video, and the book is about so much more than the video, but the video speaks so loudly. Many of us, not all, but many of us thought we were seeing what we thought we were seeing, which was a very large man, Eric Garner, being taken down and choked out by a chokehold, as I understand it. Matt, if I'm wrong, you'll tell me, is actually illegal.
It's banned.
I apologize.
Right,
It is banned.
Right, yeah.
And that is a certain kind of chokehold because it is so lethal.
Right.
but it was used.
Right. And even the commissioner said it was a chokehold.
The commissioner of the police department here.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
What was the debate?
Well, that's what the big mystery is about. I mean, if you talk to a lot of lawyers, and I talked to a lot of lawyers for this book, they said that normally you would just have to go in and show that it was a chokehold, that it was a banned procedure, that show the tape, or maybe bring in a couple of witnesses, and there you have your prima facie case for an indictment for some kind of charge.
On the face of it.
On the face of it. But instead, there was a very lengthy grand jury investigation, and what they were talking about is kind of a mystery, because really those are really the two facts. They used the banned procedure, the man died. What else is there to talk about? So that's really why in the community there was so much outrage about this case in particular. That and the fact that one of the first things I found out when I looked into this is that he wasn't actually selling cigarettes that day.
But he had in the past.
He had in the day. No question that is what he did for a living.
What does that have to do with choking him out?
Well, it explains a lot of his reaction on the tape. If you watch the tape, he's mystified in the tape because he can't understand why he's being brought in now, and also why the police had ignored a fight that had just happened on the street right in front of him. So that fed into his reaction to the police and his refusal to go in.
Did the police ever say that they did anything wrong?
No, and they also never said that he did anything wrong either. They very specifically said in their statements that he was approached in connection with selling cigarettes.
Matt, let me try to broaden this discussion because you've also written extensively about Trump, President Trump. Your other book?
Insane Clown President.
Not the Insane Clown Posse.
No.
I'm sorry for my digression. To what degree do you see any connection between the Eric Garner case and the public reaction to it? When I say public, I mean multiple publics reacting in multiple ways, and the 2016 presidential election and its outcome.
I think there was a connection. I mean, it's not absolutely direct, but if you talk to a lot of Trump supporters, which I did because I covered the presidential election during the same time I was writing this book.
For Rolling Stone.
Yeah. There was a lot of backlash politics. There was a lot.
Define backlash politics. Backlash by whom against what?
No, there was sentiment out there among Republican voters that the Black Lives Matter movement was completely
was anti-cop.
Anti-cop. That Eric Garner it was his own fault that he died because he should have just gotten in the car. That police brutality is an overblown issue, and Donald Trump, of course, fed into a lot of this.
Donald Trump, at one point, I remember he said, I'm not sure exactly when the period was, but he said to cops, if you're in fact putting a perpetrator or alleged perpetrator in the car, what did he say?
He said, basically give them an extra shove and bounce their heads off the roof.
And the audience that was there.
Yeah, they cheered. They applauded.
What does this have to do with this case in your mind?
Well, I think
is it ultimately about race?
Of course, it's about
How
race.
So?
Well, I mean, in the Garner case, a lot of it had to do with the fact that the policing techniques employed that targeted small-time criminals like him are employed very heavily on the borders of white and black neighborhoods, and these sort of broken windows policing techniques, which a lot of police officers.
Broken windows, the smallest crime you go after because if you don't, bigger things will happen. Go ahead.
Exactly, and I talk to a lot of law enforcement officers who don't like these policies, but if you watch the way they're employed, these sort of regular stops of people, they're employed on these border areas, and they keep white and black neighborhoods separate. And I think a lot of the tension in the Garner case was that he was doing what he did across the street from a big, rich condominium complex that was being built up, and otherwise the police would never have been interested in him. And I think all these racial issues played a huge role obviously in the 2016 election, and
you're fascinated by race. You write about it. You're fascinated. By the way, your family. You have any family history connected to journalism?
Yes, my father was a reporter here for ages.
Your father co-wrote one of the most incredible books ever. Tell everyone. I think it was 1984 that the book came out. I could be wrong.
Right. It was about the Tawana Brawley case. Yeah.
Race then, race now.
Yeah.
You're fascinated by. Let me ask it this way: do you believe that we have any ability to make any meaningful progress in talking about and dealing with race?
I do believe that, and you know, I actually, in most of my career, I haven't really gone after this subject very much. In fact, I was late. I covered Wall Street for 8 years and the subprime mortgage crisis, and I kind of missed the racial aspect to that until the very end of the time period when I covered that. So, but I think that there are concrete things that you can do, like, you know, in the case of these police brutality issues, you could change the way you do policing. You could do body cameras, raise better awareness, do better training. There are things that you can do. The larger problem of racism and the fact that America is still so segregated, that's a much bigger and thornier question.
I can ask this before you get out of here. You ready? Trump and the media today, are we doing enough? I know there's so many we's. We're public broadcasting.
Right.
We do it as you do. We also had Chris Matthews in here today. Chris Cuomo, Joy Reid's coming on as well. We have some other reporters. There's so many of us. We're not all the same, monolithic, right?
Right.
Overall, do we do a good enough job challenging and speaking truth to power by challenging those in power, particularly the president?
I think we do. I think, and I also don't think it's bad that we are back on the outside. You know, when Trump first started talking about you know, banning people from the White House press room, and I heard a lot of sort of complaining within, you know, the community of journalists. Oh, that's awful. You know, he shouldn't do that to us. But we should be on the outside as journalists. You know, we should get used to the position of being adversarial to power.
Really, that's our job?
I think
just
yes.
to ask questions and.
Yeah, no, I think we should be on the outside. Our job is to be a check on power, and not be on the plane and hanging out with people. I mean, I think that's how we
Access overrated?
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the things that people reacted to in the campaign is this idea that the press and people in Washington are too cozy. And Trump took advantage of that sentiment. And I think it's maybe a good thing for us to get back to this sort of more adversarial
You don't care about being popular, do you?
Well, as a reporter, if you can't care about it. I mean, if you do, you're probably in the wrong profession.
Can't do your job.
Exactly.
Check out this book. It is called I Can't Breathe, Killing on Bay Street, over in Staten Island. The Eric Garner story is important for so many reasons. Matt Taibbi, I want to thank you for joining us here on Public Television.
Thank you so much, Steve.
Anytime.
One-on-One with Steve Adubato has been a production of the Caucus Educational Corporation, celebrating over 25 years of broadcast excellence. This special edition of One-on-One with Steve Adubato is brought to you from the Tisch WNET studios at Lincoln Center. Funding has been provided by NJIT, Holy Name Medical Center in Teaneck, New Jersey, New Jersey Sharing Network, the Russell Berry Foundation, Suez, and by NJM Insurance Group. Promotional support provided by NJ.com. Small news, big news, true Jersey. Transportation provided by Airbrook Limousine, serving the metropolitan New York, New Jersey area.